Yesterday's move, you have some interesting thoughts here that I didn't realize. So Bristol-Myers at 45 was itself a takeover.
Absolutely.
And it still might be, and you think something could happen between now and when this deal closes?
Absolutely. If you look at the deal between Bristol and Celgene, Bristol has reportedly been looking at Celgene for the past 2 years, given all the issues that it's had. And Bristol being the leader or one of the leaders in the large immuno-oncology space, we believe that others have been looking at Bristol during this time as well. And given the pullback, there's a narrow window for a potential buyer to come back before the Bristol shareholders vote on this deal in early May. So we believe that between 40 to 45 provides a nice support level for Bristol.
Okay, so let's call that immuno-oncology. We'll call it IO, because that's what you like to call it. So we'll call it IO. That's a crowded space, and Bristol is too focused on that if they have any failures with their important pipeline. And they could, because so many other people are working on the same thing. So they needed to, that was their rationale for going after Celgene, to diversify into some other areas, in your view?
Absolutely. If you pull up the 2-year chart on Bristol, you'll see a lot of volatility, and those volatility, basically those are immuno-oncology trials, and this is too large of a company to be this dependent on this market. It's going to be a very large market. Right. We think a 45 to 50 billion market. Bristol is number 2, but yes, a lot of activity, and I think
gold rush, right? And we don't know who's going to win.
I mean, you do have some clear leaders with Merck and Bristol. Usually, if you look at large markets, the first few players end up getting most of it, and the latter 25% gets divided into the subsequent players. So we do have established leaders, and Bristol is the number 2 player.
So the 15 billion they said from these 6 Celgene, the market potential for these pipeline drugs at Celgene, the market is nowhere near that in your view. So that they hyped that number. Do you think, Bristol?
You know,
what do you think the market potential is? Half that? A third of that?
I think it's probably closer to 2/3 of that. The time frame is very important. A lot of these drugs are going to launch within the next 2 years, so it's going to be a while until we get to that 12 to $15 billion number. I think Celgene's cell therapy approaches are very promising. This is going to be the future of how we treat a lot of these blood cancer treatments. The MS drug that they have, which had a setback, I think that's probably a $5 billion drug. So multiple sclerosis is a very large market. So I think it needs to be close. And the other issue is that they can cut back on costs, right? The cost synergies that they provided on this deal, about $2.5 billion by 2022, is 13% of overall. I think that's very conservative. So even if some of those pipeline drugs don't pan out, I believe that they can pull the cost.
All right. So what similar transactions are possible? Who needs to buy something, and who should be bought?
Yeah, the obvious choice is AbbVie. AbbVie is very similar to Celgene. They've been under pressure. They have a big patent cliff coming up, and Bristol actually removes a dance partner for AbbVie. So they need, in my view, they need to do a transaction to basically diversify from their immunology franchise. I always thought that they could go after Bristol. It is still possible that before the Bristol votes, that AbbVie could come to them with a merger of equals proposition. I just think that the Celgene opportunity.
Are there other Celgenes around, other biotech companies that are very attractive to a major? Who are they? I
mean, you could argue Gilead is right up there, and I mean, there's obviously considerable debate about a lot of these things. I mean, that's the most obvious answer that comes to mind. But if you step back and look at this industry, there's a lot of excess capacity, both in R&D and SG&A. So you will continue to see consolidation. But you have to keep in mind, it takes a lot for a deal of this magnitude. A lot of things have to line up, and I think Bristol was being particularly opportunistic with Celgene's valuation.
When you say opportunistic, do you mean that in part it was a defensive move on Bristol's part?
I think that was an element to it. I think it was more a fact of they probably weren't going to look at Celgene at this valuation again. Level, yeah. And they've been looking at it for 2 years, so I doubt that something. I think a big reason that Bristol fell 14% yesterday is a lot of folks interpreted it as a bad signal about Bristol's own growth prospects. I'm not sure that's the case. I think they finally got Celgene's valuation got to a point where they could finally agree on a mutually agreeable price.
Alex, when does Revlimid go off they've been how have they delayed that with litigation?
Yeah, litigation. There's been some settlements. I think there's a partial generic launch in 2022 and a full generic launch in 2026. It's still a large drug generating a lot of cash flow. They're going to use that cash to deliver some of the debt that they're issuing for this deal. And what Bristol has made very clear is that they have more conservative expectations for Revlimid. They're making this deal for what you started the conversation with, those pipeline assets.